So the diplomatic controversy between India and Canada has made it back to headlines after the Indian Ministry of External Affairs released a statement today that condemned Canada and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for investigating, for saying at least that India's High Commissioner to Canada, Sanjay Verma, could be a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. The investigation that we are assuming right now refers to the assassination controversy around Hardeep Nijjar, who was assassinated in Canada last year. You would remember that Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had blamed India or agents associated or affiliated with the government of India for the assassination of Mr. Nijjar in Canada last year. Now, this has provoked a massive diplomatic controversy, with India releasing a very, very aggressive statement, and also right now we're just finding out summoning the Canadian High Commissioner to India for a diplomatic dressing down. Joining us now to unpack what's going on is Vivek Mishra of the Observer Research Foundation, someone who covers the Americas very, very closely. Vivek, thank you so much for joining us. You're sitting in Washington, D.C. right now. Could you tell us a little bit about what we've seen today in the India-Canada relationship? Could you start by helping us make sense of the statement that the MEA released? Very, very aggressive statement, directly naming and attacking Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. What got them so worked up? Could you just explain that?
Thank you, Shashank, for having me. I think if you look at the statement, it's pretty clear that there's been a pushback and there's been a consistent pushback from India. And the word of interest to me was a shred of evidence. There was not even if it was a diplomatic investigation that was going on inside Canada, at the level of protocol, at the level of diplomatic protocol, there could have been evidence shared with India, which hasn't been the case. I mean, this particularly puts the same issue, the Niger issue and the Khalistan issue, in contrast when you look at the United States. Some issues came up from there last year, earlier this year, and then when you stack it against the same issues in Canada, there's a vast difference. And the Indian diplomatic circle and the Minister of External Affairs has been consistently asking for a shred of evidence. So even at the level of diplomatic protocol, I'm surprised why that wasn't communicated. Second, I think this would be indeed a grave violation of the Vienna Convention. If you go through the tenets of Vienna Convention, marking your diplomats to be, when there's no shred of evidence, to be a person of interest, so-called, would be a grave violation of the Vienna Convention. And we would see, I would be keen in seeing how this goes forward, because definitely this signals a potential pushback in terms of steps taken. Last year or earlier this year, there were diplomats expelled, and India took similar steps. I think you would, this bilateral relationship would consistently spiral down if the Trudeau government does not take cognizance of the fact that India-Canada relations need to be prioritized over his own domestic priorities.
Right. Could you tell us a little bit about how unprecedented it is? You were explaining it before, but just this idea that Indian diplomats and the Indian ambassador, the High Commissioner to Canada, could somehow be a person of interest. The MEA responded extremely, left no doubts about what they believe about these Canadian allegations. They said that these were ridiculous allegations, and of course defended High Commissioner Sanjay Verma, saying that this is someone who is one of India's most experienced diplomats. Could you explain how unprecedented something like this is, this kind of allegation?
This is absolutely unprecedented, because this is casting aspersions on the lead diplomat from India or from any other nation into your country, and calling for interference. And now, if you go back into history, a little bit of history, there's perhaps some intercepted communication of the diplomat that the Canadian investigation points to. But where is the shred of evidence? I mean, that's one. So if it's a communication, then that should be shared firsthand with India. And I think that's not the case. So it's completely unprecedented. But if you really look at it from the perspective of the Canadian domestic politics, the NDP, which is the primary was the primary partner of the Liberal Party, Trudeau's party, has stopped communication with the Liberal Party just 2 days back in a press conference. And that's the level of struggle that Justin Trudeau is going on domestically. So I think one can imagine why there is an extra overreach for issues to find an external issue rather than laying the blame on internal issues, which is actually the fact.
Right. Could you tell us a little bit about now the Ministry of External Affairs has sort of talked about it's just summoned the High Commissioner of Canada to India. It's talked about the fact that it could use further retaliation as well. Of course, it also pointed out what you mentioned, that before it asked for several Canadian diplomats to leave India. What do you think in terms of India's potential response? What do you think that response could be in terms of, let's say, its impact on diplomatic relations? Would India take some further steps to make life more difficult for Canada? How do you think they're going to respond to this?
Absolutely. This is the first step that countries logically take as per international rules. You issue a communique or a political démarche, and I think that's what happened when the High Commissioner was called to the South Bloc. So a political démarche, and a strong one at that, is the prerequisite for this kind of communication. And I think the next steps will take certain time to unravel, and will also depend on how Canada reacts to the pushback from India. Because if Canada does not hold on and goes on to expel diplomats, perhaps, or take progressive steps in that investigation, then I think it would really spiral down, and India will definitely take steps. Now, one important thing is also that Canada is consistently casting aspersions on India as an external actor who's of influence in Canada's internal affairs. There is an ongoing investigation that the Foreign Interference Committee has been formed, and which has to submit 2 reports. And in both these reports, India has been clubbed with China, interestingly, without any, again, shred of evidence, except one journalist who claims that he was muted sometime by Indian pressure. What kind of pressure is not accorded to? So I think there has been many loopholes in this series of aspersions that Canadian domestic politics has sort of impinged on its foreign policy.
Right. Could I ask you something else that I felt was slightly unprecedented in the statement was the level to which Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was personally attacked by the Ministry of External Affairs. It really named him directly. His visit to India in 2018, where he met with someone who was a convicted, someone who's convicted of attempted murder, someone who's associated with the pro-Khalistan movement, and it directly condemned Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for what it saw as interference from him in India's politics. How unprecedented is this? Like naming and shaming a particular foreign head of state by name. Can you think of any parallels to this in India's foreign policy?
No, I mean, at least in India's great power relations and major relations with major economies and developed world of the West, I don't think this is, I think this is unprecedented. And there is, I think, a grave sort of immaturity of the statecraft from Trudeau's side. If you look at the political maturity on India's response and Canada's aspersions, I think you will see a yawning gap. Because there's been a sense of maturity on the Indian side, which is completely lacking on the Canadian side, in terms of name calling, in terms of at the diplomatic level and the political level, you expect a certain sense of decorum, which is completely missing from the Canadian side. So I think this is unprecedented, and India is only playing the catch-up game in the sense that it will retaliate commensurately to Canadian steps and Canadian aspersions. So I think India's steps will completely depend on how Canada acts. And let me assure you that it is going to be commensurate.
Right. Could I also ask you then where you see India-Canada relations now? Do you think they're effectively dead in the water until Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is removed from office and a new party, a new political dispensation comes to power?
So I think there are 2 aspects to it. One is that while this political muddle was going on since over a year, the India and Canada did not sort of sever relationship. At the level of track 2 and at the level of academics, we have had several visits. At the level of the armed forces, I think we've had several meetings. So I don't think the India-Canada relations per se, call it India's maturity or anything else, but I think the bilateral relationship still has strong strengths. But I think there are growing compulsions in the Canadian side which can only improve after a new government, perhaps Pierre Poilievre, who's currently in polls at 42% compared to Trudeau's 22%. So I think is definitive to win in September, October next year. So I think given that transition, if that really comes through, you could expect a reformation of sorts in India-Canada relationship, because currently the tenets of the Liberal Party is running against the whole India-Canada relations because of its ties with certain elements that doesn't bode well or augur well for India-Canada relations.
Understood. Vivek Mishra joining us from Washington, D.C., someone who covers the Americas for the Observer Research Foundation, writes on Canada, explaining to us what this recent controversy has been, what the impact will be on the India-Canada relationship, and just this extraordinary statement coming from the Ministry of External Affairs, which is one of the most direct and aggressive attacks by the MEA on any foreign country and any foreign leader in the past few years. Thank you so much, Vivek, for joining us, and thank you so much, viewers, for watching India Today Global.